Sounds like there's a lot of interest in creating an independent left. That's what is going on here. And this is really a viable time to do it, the first time in a long, long time. The question's how do we? I don't know if we have all the answers here. We got to hear from you guys. We're an inclusive party. It's not, Cuomo or somebody saying, this is how you do it. No, we get together and we talk about it. How do we get out the word? We talk. We talk to our neighbors, we talk to our friends, we talk to our schools, we talk to our churches. We reach out to newspapers, we call the radio stations, we call the TV stations, we write letters to the editor. We get into social media every day. We get out the word if we really mean it. That's where the brave part comes in. We need to have courage to do this. And that really turns into the next question about how do we turn hope into action without being scary. Well, you know what? Personally, I don't think one person here is scary. But on the other hand, we are challenging the status quo. And that is scary to a lot of people. So are those people going to be frozen in place? Or are they going to have the courage and the tenacity to actually find their own voices and to speak out? And this is really, really hard for a lot of people. But we have to be the ones who are the inspiration, and we have to be the role model. And we can't be saying, oh, no, I'm shy, or no, it's not me, or oh, no, if I do this, then that person's going to get in. And I already know. It's like the devil you know is better than the other one, right? Okay. That's not, there's too much at stake right now. We have to stop that mentality. And I don't know that it's scary. It is frightening to some people, but those are not the people in this room. We are the ones who will step forward. So, thank you.
Just brief comments on a few of the points raised. I'm glad the question of racism was raised. We're going to raise it. We're going to talk about it. We got a Republican candidate who's under pressure from the Department of Justice to deal with some exclusionary zoning in Westchester. He's resisting it. Cuomo's been silent on it. We have the most segregated schools in the nation. We got a Democratic Party with Arnie Duncan saying we can't stop where people choose to live, as if we didn't have FHA color-coded maps as to who got loans, how people were channeled. We didn't have Robert Moses designing racial covenants for new communities like Levittown, and we're not living with the legacy of that. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about fair housing or desegregating the schools. One of the 1963 demands was desegregated quality education. We're going to talk about that and talk about the remedies. Going back to mass incarceration, Alice Green, civil rights leader in Albany, been a Green candidate in the past. I was with her. We delivered 10,000 signatures for a Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission to look at the devastating consequences of the war on drugs and mass incarceration, have the people who have been victims testify as to what happened, and then look for reparations to pull communities back together and get the people who have been excluded from the job market and other opportunities back into a life that's worth living. So thanks for raising that, and you'll hear a lot more about that. The lesser evil, I think it's real simple. Cuomo and Astorino are slightly different variations on the same program, whether you're talking about schools, taxes, spending, and the social issues aren't going to be so much in play because the Assembly sort of set the agenda, and they're not going to move right, and Astorino's conceded that. And then the party structure question. In general, I think what the Green Party's got to do or an independent left party's got to do is not model itself as most have after the American Party model, where you call a convention and whoever comes gets to vote and you elect delegates. That's very easily controlled by the insiders and the top down. We need a membership-based party where the party structures are representing the actual members. The People's Party back in 1890s made that mistake. They had a Farmers Alliance, 40,000 sub-alliances, 40,000 lecturers. They had this whole alternative program and culture, and then they called for a national party, and the people that came from the areas where the Farmers Alliance wasn't organized were opportunistic politicians, and they, by 1896, sold them out and put them back in the Democratic Party with William Jennings Bryan. And I could give you other historical examples. So that is the kind of party structure. The Greens used to have that. We lost it in the 90s. We started to bring it partly back in the New York party structure. That's the kind of party we got to have, so it's the movement, the members control the direction, It's bottom up. If you have that open structure, the insiders control it, and you have indirect representation of everybody in a district or every enrollee in a district, it doesn't really create a movement that organizes people rather than just mobilizes people for elections. Which brings up, how do we link to organized labor? I think the Labor Party effort was different than the British Party model in that you had your vote as a union in the Labor Party structure, the one that was, Tony Mazzocchi and them, and John was part of it, set up in the 90s, was your vote from your union is proportional to the people in your union at the rank and file that pays dues out of their own pocket, not out of the union treasury. That gets you more accountability to members. I think that's the kind of structure where you want unions, community organizations to affiliate. When we wrote our rules in 2011, we did discuss affiliation of organizations, but since we're getting the rules passed, it was a complicated question and we just left it out for now, but it's something we could incorporate. And I'll also say that unions are different. Bhaskar mentioned the Chicago Teachers Union. I've been talking with labor councils, I've been talking with unions, particularly the public sector workers, the teachers, the CSEA, the PEF. They're not part of Working Families Party on this question. They hate Cuomo, and they want an alternative. And so I think it's open for building relationships with labor. And the last thing I want to say is, Elizabeth said we need to get together. I know there's going to be a New York City organizing meeting. There's a sign-up sheet, and there'll be more coming. They just got here. So sign that up, and the campaign will get back in touch with you about meetings where we can get organized. And then on labor, we have a Labor for Hawkins and Jones statement that rank and file labor people, and we hope some locals will eventually sign, that I'll pass around copies of that now. And those of you who are union members, I hope you'll sign it, because we don't have to let, the officers of our unions don't have to speak for us if we want to do something else. So rank and file, speak up and sign the statement. I'm going to pass it around. Thanks.
In my view, in many ways, the answers to a lot of these questions, we have to come back to the centrality of struggle as the way that we all are going to make change. It's when we're organized and actually fighting that new possibilities open up, new alliances, new formations, new ideological horizons, new electoral calculations, new demographics. All kinds of things change when we actually go into a fight. And that's why we are in a very particular moment here in this campaign, where the issue that perhaps where Cuomo is pissing people off, perhaps more than any other issue, public education, is the very issue where we have begun to join a real battle, where finally our side is getting organized and actually fighting in the unions, among parents, and even among students. And so that organized strength, that is the foundation of real independent politics in the ballot box. And I think that's the same thing when it comes to making alliances with unions. Where we have unions that have decided to take on the employers and wage a real struggle, uniquely it just so happens to be that there's a trend of this in education going on, in teacher unionism. That kind of organizing, that then gets expressed in the union elections, could be the basis of a new political movement that's independent of the Democratic Party, because many of those, if not all of the cities I named, you have union leaders whose political ideas are very much independent of the Democratic Party, and their political horizons are independent. So that is where new possibilities open up. So we have to go back to that again and again. We are not going to play some trick at the electoral level that's going to save us from the problems that we face. This has got to be a campaign that's about giving energy and strength back to the actual organizing, because that's going to be ultimately the source of our power, full stop. If we don't have that, we have nothing. I think that, with all respect to Megan's question, first of all, of course, I think in many different forums, talking to many different people, of course we always want to be patient and know who we're talking to and, take people along from wherever their starting point is. Of course, let's assume that. But I think there's even many more people for whom the status quo is scary right now. For them, most of them are not even participating in elections because to hell with them. They're all bums, and they're right. So for those people for whom real change is a burning need. For those people, this campaign is not scary. This campaign is welcome relief. And that's mainly where we have to orient ourselves. The question of lesser evilism pulls on really good people. It is going to be something that we're all going to have to respond to. It's a really important point. It's constantly the refrain. And I think a general point that we can make is that the logic of lesser evilism, while within its own rubric may be formally correct, sure, find a Republican. Evilism means that the evil increases over time. It's eviler and eviler. That is not... And so, while technically correct, we have to step back and say, that cannot be a solution for us. It cannot be a solution for us. The only way to shift the dynamic is to vote for what you actually want. To make your vote, that's the way you don't throw away your vote, is when you vote for what you want. That's the way to build a real alternative. And for what structure in the more, Howie answered it maybe in a longer term, bigger picture sense. In a more immediate sense, speaking to the sister here, I think what we have to form in New York City are committees. Committees for the Hawkins-Jones campaign. Committees that anybody can join, whether you're a member of the Green Party or not. Whether you agree with the maximum program or not, if you agree with this campaign and you want to get with this campaign, then you can join and you can have a say and you can shape it and you can have workshops and you can figure out what are the initiatives that the campaign can take on. So that's the kind of structure that we want to launch basically in the next 2 weeks here in New York City. So please sign up and stay tuned. If you want to be at that first meeting where we get together and talk about launching those committees, then sign up with us. Thank you.
Claire, do you want to do some responses before we get a few more questions?
We're talking about something that we don't have a pre-made formula for. We're talking about a horizon, something that at some point in the future, when it's possible, when it's feasible, we would want. And the problem with the left and with the past few decades of defeat is that we haven't gotten a chance to really think through in either theory or practice these really difficult questions. Like, how do you avoid bureaucracy in a party like that? How do we even avoid it in even good unions? Because once energy has died down from good progressive union, it's not often the bureaucrats, at least in the first stage, stealing power away from rank and file right away. A lot of times people are just tired. They've been struggling for 2-3 years. They kind of want someone to pick up the slack. That's sometimes like people stop coming to meetings when struggles die down sometimes. And that's one of the roots of bureaucratization, among others. So we need to resolve these questions. I don't have any solutions. My comment about the Working Families Party base, well, part of it was just the very simple, which I think everyone here agrees with, which is there's a lot of pissed off people who were at the convention or were voting yesterday, and there's a lot of pissed off small donors, and those are a very good, solid foundation. My other point that I guess people might agree with or disagree with here is that there have been limited gains by the Working Families Party, and those gains, I think we've reached the limits of what the Working Families Party can do for the left, but there have been gains. So a lot of their work against making inroads, whether intentionally or not, against old outer borough machines, I think that puts the left in a better position in the outer boroughs. I think small gains like public financing of elections or whatnot is extremely important for an independent left. Because what we have and what other parts of the political landscape in New York don't have is we have actual cadre. We have real numbers. And if our numbers can be multiplied, if our number of full-time activists and volunteers can be multiplied as a result of us utilizing new public financing laws, I think that's a boon for the left. So that's all I was saying. It's a very limited claim. And I mean, my last comment would just be that generally good organizers walk into any situation and think as a default that people are behaving rationally in some way. So in other words, if people are choosing to be apathetic or feel like their only option is voting for the Democratic Party, our response to that shouldn't be like to disabuse them of some false consciousness or whatnot. Our response is to be that we should recognize that collective action is hard. Voting for a new upstart party like the Green or another third-party effort, that's a leap into the unknown. So what we need to do is organize, create institutions, create infrastructures of dissent to make that collective action a more feasible alternative to people. And I think that's what we'll be doing over the next few months. And I think this will be the start of a process, a long process of doing this.
Great, thank you. Okay,
putting yourselves out there and representing the issues that we all care about, and I know that's a lot of work, and I really want to thank you for that. I think there's a lot of really interesting questions about Working Families Party, about Green Party, the future Labor Party, and I think it's really interesting. I don't have the answers to those questions, but I did want to say that I think a lot of those questions will become more concrete and the answers will become more clear as movements develop. Like as we have a more thriving labor movement, the question of whether we need a Labor Party, whether the Green Party can fill that role, et cetera, I think will become more clear. I think it's a little bit abstract now given where we're at, but I do think the important question is, how does this campaign help to build that movement? And I think that, it's not just about waiting for those movements to develop and then we'll see how independent politics comes out of there, but that there's a relationship between the two. To the extent that those movements exist, they help to fuel a movement like, a campaign like Hawkins-Jones, and then vice versa, that campaign will then also fuel those movements. And one of the first political things that I did when I moved to New York was get involved with the Nader 2000 campaign, and I was one of the chair people of the Village campaign for Nader, which was a really exciting neighborhood committee. And it was a different time. It was in the midst of the global justice movement, but we had weekly meetings, tablings, petitionings. We went to like every political and non-political event that was going on in the neighborhood to campaign for Nader and get the issues out there. We did fundraisers, et cetera, et cetera. And what was really exciting to me about that whole campaign was that it put us into contact with tons of people that were politicizing, and a lot of people flowed into the campaign, new young folks. It became, through that campaign, politicos, became activists that lasted well past the 2000 campaign itself. And I think that that's really the potential, especially as we can also align now strategically with, teachers in New York, with labor, independent labor activists, with eco-socialists, so that we could think of this campaign as really a vehicle to help develop those movements, which will then also fuel an ability to have even more of a thriving independent political movement as well. Thanks.
So yeah, I want to join the early commenters. First of all, thanking you guys for putting yourselves out there. I think I just want to take a moment to recognize that it takes a tremendous amount of political courage to put yourselves out there to face the two-party system. It is not an easy thing to do, so thank you guys for doing that. And just a quick question, which is that, Brian mentioned the idea of sort of the abusive relationship. I think that communities of color have had an abusive relationship with the Democratic Party for a really long time. So I just wonder if the Green Party has a strategy to try to do some outreach, because I think that there are tons of people in communities of color who feel like, they're just not participating at all in the political system because they feel like, they're either not heard whatsoever or they're taken advantage of by the Democratic Party. So I was wondering if you guys had a strategy or some ideas about that.
I just, I'm not a member of the Green Party, I should say that right up front, but I've worked with them in California really closely. Came back to New York a couple of years ago. In terms of getting publicity, which is the hardest thing you face for voters outside of the Green Party who want to vote for a governor, have you thought of doing something like having a rally? An old-fashioned rally, not where you have to look for it on the internet, but where there's stickers all over lampposts and in this subway station saying there's a rally. Put forward a few demands, like pardons for all people that have been convicted of marijuana. Stop, restrain the New York Police Department, more affordable housing, and then have the speakers be the people that are running for office in the Green Party, and do that in a place like New York. You'll get thousands of people, and it's not, all you need to do is get a permit and print stickers and put them everywhere, and you'll get thousands of people, and that'll get free publicity, and it'll be people that aren't really necessarily thinking about voting right away, and it could bring in a lot of people that don't even bother to vote right now to vote for your candidates. And I just wanted to put that out there as an idea, because it's rallies like that aren't done anymore. You have to search for groups on the internet now, And people have lost this skill of organizing like that.
Thank you. Brother right back.
Yeah, my name is Irving Lee. I just wanted to say that in terms of the lesser evil argument, it's becoming less and less of a difference between both parties. Both parties support the national security state, and both support the war on terror. So I don't see there's any fundamental difference, especially within New York State, because the Republican Party on social issues are progressive in that sense. They're not supporting the overturning of abortion rights, for that matter. So I think it's less of a question in New York State, and less of a question, maybe becoming less of a question nationally. In terms of the actual issue of the Labor Party itself, I don't think the Labor Party by itself is only instrument for progressive change, because it assumes that only labor is the only instrument for progressive change, which we know is fundamentally false, because you can have reactionary labor rights. I mean, they exist. I'm a laborer myself. I'm a trade unionist, a transport workers union. So I think it's good to have a broader sector, a Green Party that represents all sectors of society that support the program and progressive change and is anti-colonial in nature. I think that's more critical than anything else.
Terrific. A few more people we have a bit of time for. This brother over here, here, and then. Okay.
You never get over here.
All right.
Yeah.
We're going to give preference to our videographer start first, and then we'll go here. The brother standing up. Who else did this gentleman right here, and. Okay, for now. Thank you.
My nephew teaches marketing at St. John's University, and one day we were talking at a family get-together, and he mentions dummy product, which I didn't know anything about. And then he gave an example. He said that suppose you're a car manufacturer, you offer a 100 horsepower engine and you offer a 200 horsepower engine, and you make more profit on the 200 horsepower engine, and you want people to get to you to buy it, but too many people are buying the 100 horsepower engine. So what do? You offer a 300 horsepower engine. Even though you might not even have a 300 horsepower engine, you offer it. It's called a dummy product because people tend to go for the average. It seems to be built in. It's a labor-saving device. Most people are too mentally lazy to do much thinking, so they say, I'll just take the mean between extremes. So I said to him, does this apply in politics? And he said, I don't know, but I'll send you some references. He sent me some references. It turns out it does apply in politics. So the effect then, say you have a Democrat and Republican running, and then a radical left person runs, say Green Party. What does it tend to do? It tends to help the Democrat. It's not, not every case, but that's a general rule, that it doesn't necessarily help the Republican. They pick the guy in the middle. Thank you.
Oh, hi. This is just kind of a general comment as the current volunteer with the Hawkins campaign in the Albany area. Something that we're instituting in our meetings are allotting time for skill shares, so if people are familiar with grassroots organizing techniques, whether it's canvassing or phone banking or working with the media or doing stuff online, they can share those skills so we can all have them and we can build leaders within our particular area. So that's something that if you guys are going to start doing meetings, I would highly recommend incorporating. And if you're yourself not familiar, contacting allies who might be familiar from maybe the Occupy folks or any sympathetic labor folks who might have done it. Just utilizing the resources in your community to actually start building a, for lack of a better term, apparatus that we can utilize in the coming election.
Thank you.
Just want to say I was following the Working Families Party stuff yesterday late into the night and feeling very encouraged by the amount of democracy that was on display that evening with the different representatives and the way the state committee functioned. And it was a rare event there, and I hope they see more of that kind of action. But it's important to recognize that it was a really good, accurate picture of the balance of forces in New York politics. When we talk about how it's a party of affiliates, they are suggest that after failing to cause change in those structures that are very grassroots oriented, what we really need to do is move on to much larger pools of voters who are also unengaged, and then surely we'll win. It sounds like someone who just lost a fight and then says, yeah, but let me go after someone bigger tomorrow night and you'll see me win. And I think that's kind of weird because it doesn't take into account the balance of forces is about which organizations, social sectors, influentials do you have on your side, and how has that changed and evolved. With the exception of Bhaskar, I don't hear a conversation around those things. I hear mostly statements of ideology and perspective and not like actual politics. So one last thing in reference to the skills that people might get, I'll just say there are many opportunities to learn the techniques of campaigning in New York City at this time. I'll leave these out front, but those opportunities do exist, and it'd be good to learn them from the people who win elections. So thank you.
Did you have your hand up? Okay, so we're starting to wind down, but you're the next person.
Oh, okay. I guess in regard, I think there are a lot of very good points raised today, and I agree this is going to become a very important campaign, both in terms going forward in terms of what it means for both New York State and and with bigger implications way beyond that, nationally and perhaps beyond as well. I think last night was also very revealing in terms of the split between the rank and file as well as the certain leadership in institutions that clearly need to be more democratic, where it's multi in many different ways. And I think that there's a tremendous opportunity to reach out to different folks. I think one question I do have is, to Howie and to Brian, is to what the plan is to reach out to the rank and file, as rank and file members of unions, as well as to, because I think the perception that's going to be played in the media that was the union leaders, and therefore somehow the unions that therefore wanted the Working Families Party to back Cuomo over any other alternative, because somehow perhaps they were afraid of Cuomo, they may get some bad contracts, or first more they were. It seems like they were more willing to continue to work, and they're saying they can get certain. Well, we can somehow get. We'll get back the state senate, but in reality, they are Democrats in the majority of the state senate. But that some of them chose a different path, to maintain the power structure against working people's interests. And I guess the other question is, in terms of the strategy for reaching out to non-rank and file members, non-union members, since that actually is, at this point, the vast majority of people, both in New York State as well as the country. And as we all know, private section union, the percentage union members have been on the decline, both because of, for any number of reasons that I'm sure have been talked about this forum and elsewhere. And therefore, what your views are on that.
Thank you. So I'd really like to turn it back to the panel, be respectful that there are sessions coming up, give them 3 minutes or so each to but is there any sister in the room that would like to make a comment or a question, since we didn't hear very many from women here? So we heard from Elizabeth, but I'm wondering if there's anyone else.
Here she is.
Yes, she did speak before, but yes, Elizabeth, if you'd like to just say something briefly.
Yes, I was just thinking, I was most impressed with Teresa's presentation too, and we haven't heard much response when I've been here in regard to that. And there's an issue that's very dear to me that is never brought up, and I would just like to throw it out. I know this is a late date to change platforms and so forth, but I will raise it. It has to do with support for women and particularly mothers and parents. Support for parents. We have very little support. Other countries, as you may know, offer. Well, at one time, Sweden offered 80% of your salary the first year if you wanted to stay at home with your child, either to the mother or the father, and 70% the second and third years if you wanted to stay at home. And this is very critical to the child's developing its genetic inheritance. We now know that children who don't bond with a secure caregiver who's sensitive the first 3 years of life do not develop neurologically. So it's very critical. And we could, I think, reach many people who understand about this and care about this through having on the platform something about offering paid
Child care?
No, it's not for child care. It's to pay parents who want to stay with their children the first 3 years. It's paid family leave, paid parental leave.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Right, family leave. Okay, so I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody's questions and comments. I hope there are other opportunities to have a dialogue, but I'd like to ask our panelists to, respond, wrap up, make whatever points that came up in the discussion or didn't come up in the discussion before we end. So,
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that very important point. I would say that when we had our children, we were forced to make a decision, and because we were both working, but I had health insurance. I was the one who had to go back to work, and my husband stayed home with our infants and toddlers and our 3 kids. So he did that and sacrificed as well. What I also would like to say is that it's interesting how the conversation the discussion has evolved from how do we build the movement into solutions of how we build the movement. And again, I think that this is representative of the Green Party. We are solution focused. Now we're talking about outreach. We're talking about skill sharing, and I thought that was a tremendous, astute comment about how we are perceived. And I think that that's another challenge that the party has to address as well. So I'll turn it over to Howie at this point.
Thank you. We should let Howie and Brian go last, right? I think.
Oh, okay.
I'll go next.
That's fine with me.
Sorry.
No problem.
I feel very important now all of a sudden with this. So just very quickly, less than 2 minutes, just to go over a few of the things. I do think we need to redefine what we think about when we say Labor Party. Obviously, the social movements matter, and when I said before that we need conditions in which a party like that, a electoral vehicle like that, could function nationwide and could really have it push a program nationwide that transform America, it would depend on having massive social movements that don't exist in the United States now and haven't existed for decades. Even what we had in the 30s might have not been sufficient to sustain and build a nationwide labor party. But also we should to redefine what we think when we think about what's a labor issue and what's not a labor issue. If a labor member, a union member, if she has a pothole in front of her house, that's a union problem. That's a problem that we shouldn't really separate from the fact that separate into some like civic problem as opposed to a problem that concerns a political party and a smaller vehicle like a labor union. I would agree that the Working Families Party is to the left of New York State as a whole, at least the people. I mean, obviously they are. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a strong, confident, principled minority. So there's this slogan used by some of the more left members of the Working Families Party that say that they're the left wing of the possible. But it really shows, I think, yesterday that a lot of these good principled people that were voting no on Cuomo and pushing for other people, I think they really exposed themselves as being on the right wing of the impossible. And I think that's the difference. We're pushing at the moment a minority politics, a politics that only appeals to a small amount of people and that most people are not familiar with and not comfortable with at the moment. But that's just for now. I mean, we're trying to build something in the future. So we don't want to be stuck in the prison of the possible. So, we're not immediately going out, we're not handing out things in the front calling for immediate world revolution and defense of North Korea or whatnot. I mean, we are engaging in real politics, but we're engaging with real politics with a vision. And I do agree that not only is maternity leave and paid parental leave important, but in Sweden, a lot of the best programs of these Nordic countries, they had mandatory paternity leave. Because if you actually have men in the first few weeks or few months when they have a child taking off and being forced to take care of the kid, then in the long run, there's studies that show that actually helps erode some of the gender, division of labor in the household and some of the tyranny of care work being thrown only towards women in the home. So that's all. I do think that's very important. Yeah.
Ryan or Howie?
I'll go. I think if paid maternity and paternity leave are not on our platform, then they should be in the next 24 hours or 24 minutes. It's absolutely essential that we fight for that. It's ridiculous that you have a female-dominated profession like teaching where people can't get maternity leave. That's outrageous, and there's no reason for it except that women's labor is undervalued in our society. So we have to be a movement that can speak very clearly, as the sister did here, to issues like that and fight for them. I absolutely believe that. I do want to speak to the criticism from the brother in the back. We welcome it. Thank you for raising it. It's not. These are forums where people should raise, disagreements or criticisms or what have you. It's not just rah-rah. We have to think through what it is we're saying and what it is that our critics have to say. So thank you for that. I do think that what we're presenting here is not a presentation of our forces that is larger than they actually are. I don't think that's what we're saying. In fact, that was my reason for emphasizing the centrality of struggle and for emphasizing the fact that where we have begun to put forward some organizing and fighting, that is the basis of our strength, full stop. And where we don't have it, then we're weak. And so for me, that's not purely our work in the unions. When I say our, I mean our broadly conceived activists in the unions trying to democratize them. Because yes, that is also at a nascent stage. We don't nearly have the kinds of reach into the schools, more than 1,500 schools, and we're not in even half of them in New York City. So that's not strength that we have. We do have pockets of strength. We have schools where we're strong. We have districts where we're strong, or small regions where our strength is growing. And what we're doing in those schools, frankly, I think is impressive and huge steps forward for people who are trying to organize and fight. If this campaign helps to consolidate those steps forward, then it is a step forward for us. And that doesn't mean that we're saying we're going to the state level because we're just so strong on the that's not what it's about. It's about figuring out a way to speak at this level to give strength to all of those roots and those little shoots that are shooting up out of the ground right now. So definitely, I think we don't want to get ahead of ourselves and think we have more than we actually have. We have to be very sober and realistic, but I think there's a way in which we can insert ourselves in something that everybody's going to be talking about for the next 5 months, which is who should be the next governor. All of our coworkers, classmates, colleagues, neighbors, family, every picnic, every dinner, every barbecue, people are going to be talking about this. And now we will have a way to insert ourselves. And the other thing that's important about the campaign is it's not just the work in the unions, as central as that is. It's about saying to Hadass, who's working in the eco-socialist movement, that, look, we're going to put those people in the same room as the people who've been working in the unions. We're going to take the people who are fighting the new Jim Crow, people who are fighting solitary confinement, people who are fighting to get ICE out of their communities, the immigration forces out of their communities, and to stop the unlawful detention of children. We're going to get those activists together in the same room and say that we should have a common politics that's independent of the Democratic Party. And the extent to which we do that, that will be a huge contribution to giving our movement strength in the next round of struggle. That's what this is about. And so I think that's why I'm really glad that the brother in the back brought up the issue of reaching out to communities of color. Because if we are going to go forward, we have to desegregate our movement. We have to have a multiracial struggle. And if we don't have that, then that is a profound weakness on our side, and we have to see it that way. The first step is taking that on as our outlook. Our outlook has to be multiracial, and that means speaking directly to the issues that are burning for people who are not white, for people in communities of color, for African Americans, immigrants, and Arabs and Muslims, and for everybody. People have different issues and are struggling with different issues in their communities. We have to listen, understand, adopt their demands and their burning needs as our own, and speak with one voice. That is the beginning of what we're trying to do here. I just want to say one last thing before I stop, which is that, and I'm not saying you're saying this, brother, but there is a kind of naysaying line of argument that is, well, you can't win, or you're too small, or you're not viable, or all of this kind of thing. Look, But everybody will say to you, but of course I understand we need third parties. Of course, I wish, yeah, of course we have to have more parties. Yes, of course, you know. But it's like, of course, but it's never now. It's never that we have to start right now building from where we are. And that has to be our argument. There's no such thing that's going to emerge outside of what we do. There's no phantasmagorical third party that's going to come in and suddenly out of nowhere be viable, separate from the energy, money, and sweat that we in this room put into building such a thing. And that is what we're attempting to do over the next 5 months. I hope you join us, brother.
Well, I really appreciate everybody's comments. The comment about paid maternity leave is why I said that we need a party that organizes, doesn't just mobilize like it's got all the answers. And yeah, I think within 24 hours we got to get a bullet point on our platform that addresses that question. It's not in there yet. I mean, we got whole sectors that, you know, we're still putting up there. And that's why this is our campaign, not my campaign or Brian's campaign. I thought that remark about the dummy product was very interesting. I can back it up with anecdote. Maybe people do look for the middle. The only time in the last, I don't know, 5 election cycles our corporate Democrat has beat the right-wing Republican in our congressional district in Syracuse is when a Green ran. And I think what happened was the Green moved the debate to where more people were at. And they might have voted lesser evil, but what it did was expose the Republican, because in the absence of a Green, the Democrat moves to the right to try to get the vote between them and the Republicans. So I did it in 2008, and the Democrat won. Ursula Rosen, my campaign manager, she ran against a really right-wing Tea Party woman and a corporate Democrat, really corporate New Democrat. Really clear the Greens had to challenge that, but when she ran, the Democrats, particularly the middle-class university types, oh, you're going to split the vote, you're going to elect the Tea Party woman again. Well, they both spent $5 million. She spent $15,000. She got 8% of the vote. She got that vote more in the blue-collar, working-class districts. And then when when the Republican lost, then the Republican Tea Party people were saying, "Oh, you split the women's vote. You know, you split the election. You spoiled the election." So she got it from both sides. But I think that's a case where, yeah, we run and we actually help the Democrat. We don't help the Republican in a lot of cases. Now, I'm a little more optimistic on where we're at and where the people are at. I think the problem of American politics is that the generally progressive values, particularly on economic class issues that Americans hold, you know, they believe you ought to have the right to a job. You know, it's really important. And that your schools ought to be good. And you should be able to get health care. That's not something as a buy or sell, buy or die commodity. It's something that you should have a right to. And the polls back that up. A majority of people were for single payer when the Democrats were saying it's politically impossible and Pelosi and Obama put it off the table. I mean, it was overwhelmingly landslide numbers. The right to a job, we just recently got a poll, first one since the 1970s. You know, the majority of people that had an opinion were for that. What we've been missing, I would argue, in American politics is a mass party of the people. I'm not talking about a little protest party that's raising issues. I think we're at the point where we can get a substantial vote that can grow from there. And again, the missing piece has been the left has generally tried to imitate the Democrats, Republicans, the American Party tradition, where you call conventions without organizing people into active dues-paying locals, where we fund. This is an invention of the left all over the world, and the Americans haven't quite figured it out. The only way we can compete with the 1% is all of us put a little money in. Our political independence depends on our financial independence. We've done that with unions. Unfortunately, we let the bureaucracy take control, but we're not going to have an alternative until we're organized and funding it ourselves. As far as reaching out to sectors, I mean, communities of color, that is extremely important, extremely, I think, a rich vein of votes, at least in terms of this election, because the polls show that Cuomo's lost support, and it's been entirely in the blue box. There was a New York Times write-up compared him to Sonia Sotomayor. She, you know, went up the ladder, and she's now on the Supreme Court. He stayed in the neighborhood. He does enormous amount of pro bono work for people having problems with tenants or stop and frisk. He's marching in the Puerto Rican Day Parade with a green contingent today up in the Bronx. He's the one that exposed the pocketing the money and got Schneiderman to do the investigation and force those people that were taking the money off the board. But Ramon says that's not justice. They should have been indicted. What's the deal? You know, and he's on a whole lot of other issues. So he was a Freedom Party candidate in 2010, and we didn't have one. Most of us voted for him, but now we're happy to have him on the Green Line. And we were building relationship with a lot of those people who were in the Freedom campaign last time. We're going to have Spanish language stuff, but that, you know, we've got to really, I think, put effort into that. And I guess my last point, well, in terms of balance of forces and reaching sectors, I think that's extremely important, and we didn't talk about it much here, but we've been doing that, you know, talking to the working families rank and file. You know, first question I got when I announced is, what are you going to do if they run? I said they should run. You know, their platform is the opposite of Cuomo's. They should run against them. In fact, they should nominate me and we'll have a united fight.
Yeah, that's right. That's
now, I knew the leadership was never going to do that. And I can tell you, I got more beef with them than anybody in the state because they've come in my district and let Republicans go free to defeat me as an independent on the left because they see us as a rival. And you know, my position with them is, you need us out here for your strategy. We give you more leverage because, you know, people will vote for us and the Democrats see that they might, you know, vote for some of the issues we want. So, you know, we may disagree on strategy, but we have common interests on policy, and there are ways we can work together. Our big enemy are the, you know, the main candidates of the major parties. And while we got criticisms of working families with the deals they cut, you know, we understand that on a lot of policy issues, we're going in this direction, and Cuomo and Astorino going in that direction. So I think we need to have that attitude. So that's toward that sector. I mentioned labor. We've been working with the anti-fracking movement. I mean, that is really one of the strongest movements in the state. We've held off, you know, the petro states, the Saudis, the Chinese, ExxonMobil, who've wanted to frack New York for 4 years because we made it politically impossible for Cuomo. Now, we want to get him off the fence now. I mean, this is a big issue for the anti-fracking movement because if he turns to his presidential ambitions after if he gets elected, he's going to join the pro-fracking consensus of the Democratic Party, which Schumer and Gillibrand reaffirmed, you know, a couple of weeks ago, and you know they kind of put the pressure on Cuomo, and the you know, Obama administration has been very pro-fracking. So that's a movement where we got relationships, and we're going to get a lot of votes out of it. And finally, I'll say, you know, we have local bases. You know, in Syracuse, when I ran in 2010, I got nearly 6% in Onondaga County, and the surrounding counties 3.5% because, you know, we've got a base up there, and we got another bulge in the Albany area where a lot of state workers knew Cuomo was coming after them. So we need to build more of those local bases. I think that's another sector. And last thing I'll say is those labor statements out there, get them back to us so you'll be on the web pages of rank and file supporter of labor for Hawkins and Jones. And so don't walk out of here with them. Turn them in now. Thanks.
Just a quick sum up, but first we want to thank all our panelists for sharing everything, both strategies and solutions. Teresa, Howie, and Brian for also putting themselves out as candidates, for Bhaskar for the writings, the publication he puts out, and his very balanced analysis today. And so we started out talking about Cuomo. That was the first part of our session, you know, title, and then what is to be done. So right now, what is to be done is get involved in the Hawkins-Jones campaign in a way that fits your schedule, fits your perspective, fits your group, your organization. Basically take the political discourse that's been going on this weekend, put it into practice. We're looking in the long term, first of all, get that real debate petition going around. That's another short-term thing we can do. For the long term, we have to continue to point out that capitalism has failed in 99%, that we have to grow a movement for a just and equitable society while we're building an independent political force. Shama Sawant said it's not one or the other. One doesn't precede the other. One doesn't stifle the other. They have to be done together. And as far as we know what to be done, we know what to be done, and now it's the time to do it, and it's really kind of a transformative us. So it's not about being confined to our political parties, our organizations, but putting the reasons why we're in these political parties and in these organizations. Why do we do this? Why do we put our time and our resources into this? It's because of every person that doesn't get affordable health care, every hungry child, every student in debt, every human being that's persecuted, whether it's for their, their race, where they come from, who they choose to love, and basically, in my opinion right now, the imperative to really fight for and protect life itself while we stand on the precipice of a planetary emergency. And that is what our candidates stand for. That is what our movement stands for. So thank you all for your wonderful comments and questions and being here today.